views and opinions expressed in this podcast by the host and or the guest do not necessarily reflect the views of the host and or Paranormal Buzz Radio and or its sponsors. Use of any material produced by Paranormal Buzz Radio without express written consent is prohibited. Paranormal Buzz Radio will not be held responsible for you holding your knees, crying, and rocking in a corner in a puddle of your own urine, or being beheaded by a group of children in a cornfield. In fact, if you come across a group of children in a cornfield, we promise to make fun of you as you run away screaming in terror. Listener discretion is advised.
Everyone, welcome back to another episode of Demon Folklorist. Today we're going to be talking about Zozo, but I also do want to let everyone know who happens to enjoy the podcast, this is going to be my final episode, and it's genuinely because I am exhausted. I've been burning the candle at both ends, and I've also stopped writing for Morbidly Beautiful. Both experiences working with Paranormal Buzz Radio and Morbidly Beautiful have been wonderful. Nobody should ever take from this that I wasn't having a good time with it or nothing like that. It is simply that I'm exhausted. I'm out of ideas. I really need to rest and figure out what I want to do next. So I might do a visual podcast. I might do some kind of Patreon. I really don't know. But I need some time to figure it out, and I hope you guys understand. All 5 of my wonderful listeners, love you all. But yeah, so today we're going to be talking about Zozo and the phenomenon of this entity that seems to come out of talking boards, also known as Ouija boards. And my Salem is being extremely noisy today, so be aware you might hear him trilling. Hey, sweet baby. So that's what's going on. All right. To be able to talk about Zozo, we first have to talk about spirit boards a little bit. They first began as a commercial venture and not really exactly a communication device. Yes, that's what its purpose was, but it was more of a novelty item. It was just more of maybe we can communicate with somebody or not. It doesn't really matter. But over time, and especially with Hollywood, it made them into something that was dark and evil, something to be feared. A Ouija board, much like any other tool, is only dangerous if you don't really know how to use it. And yes, there is a risk. You don't know what's on the other side, but a full-fledged demon is likely not on the other side every single time you open a spirit board session. But that isn't to say it's impossible. It's just extremely improbable because of how rare demons are to begin with. And then The Exorcist in the 70s, and this started with William Peter Blatty's novel of the same name, coming at a time when he was hoping with his novel to build faith. And instead, it really kind of capitalized on fear, and the things that people feared were going on with the Satanic Panic is something that was largely known in the 80s, but it is something that gets reborn every few years, and it started in ancient times where Christianity was taking over pagan lands, and they decided that everything pagans were doing, cunning folk, healers, anything, that was evil. And so to sort of take power, I think, away from these people who were helping their people, they started saying they're Satanists, they're witches, they are, dancing with the devil in the moonlight in the woods, naked. And it's ain't nobody taking their clothes off in the woods. Let's be honest, way too cold. But, people believe this stuff. And they also came to believe that witches were very evil and that everything they did was satanic. And this carried over many, many generations and is now sort of rebirthing. Christians seem to really fear being targeted by a Satanist. And it's not like it could have never happened. There are extremists in every single religion. But Satanism, like Anton LaVey's Satanism, they have a whole section in their Bible, because yes, I've read the Satanic Bible, of, don't do harm to others. So if they're practicing that, then yeah, they're probably not very interested in you. A lot of magic in general is people trying to fix their own lives. So there is a lot of satanic panic going on, but it really started with William Peter Blatty's novel and then the movie The Exorcist, because now demonic possession was not some faraway concept anymore. It was in your living room, and you could see the horrific effects of a possession on a little girl who was playing with a Ouija board. Then a movie called Witchboard in the 80s helped to again fuel those Ouija nightmares of possession and murder and all the things that were possible through the board. And I'm just kind of like, it's a board. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, but I think some of these fears are quite overblown. And it's not to say that some sessions can't be dangerous. It's just like, it's a tool. And the tool itself is not what's causing the ruckus. You know what I mean? It's you not knowing how to use it. Or also the possibility that you're subconsciously projecting the idea that you're going to have a negative experience, and so you do. Ouija was invented in the late 19th century, and there was a lot of interest when it came out because of spiritualism and mediumship going on at the time. Even around that time, there was some bad advice that was given out by spirit communicators, but people also posit that it could be simply that people wanted to hear a certain answer, so they kept sort of nudging the planchette to give them that answer, because maybe that was the answer they desired. Permission to maybe act out of character, to do something maybe greedy or murderous. People are evil. The name Ouija is thought to have been named by itself. The legend is that they asked what to call it, and it's spelled out Uija, Ouija, and it told them that it means good luck. We have no idea what it means, and I'm inclined not to trust spirits because most of my experiences with them have been very malicious and had a lot of ill intent. But not every spirit is this way. Obviously, it's just this is the legacy of being psychic in my family. I also have no interest in talking to them, so talking boards are just not really my thing. But I don't think it's inherently evil. It's just you need to know what you're doing before you use any kind of talking board. Just do your research and talk to other people who use them. But there is a risk. I do want to make that clear. There is a risk no matter what you do in the paranormal. There is a risk of going into a haunted house and coming out with some kind of spirit attachment. These things do happen. And it can be dangerous even for someone like me to go into a haunted house. For multiple reasons, it might drain my energy. I might feel really, really sick. You never know. So just be aware of those things. But I mention this and I talk about this so much because one of the things that we are asked almost always when it comes to demonology is, are Ouija boards dangerous? Should we be using them? And it's like, the board's not dangerous. It's a board. But there is the possibility of contacting something that may not have your best interests at heart. But, you know, there's risk in everything. It just depends on how much risk you're willing to go through. Really, this whole idea of the Ouija board being evil directly comes from William Peter Blatty and The Exorcist becoming a horror movie. So it's just a little tired how much we hear this. But yeah, so the entity that calls itself Zozo apparently uses other forms of communication, but it appears to prefer the talking board. And something that caught my interest was while Rosemary Ellen Guiley and Darren Evans were working on their book about the Zozo phenomenon, all sorts of strange things went wrong concerning the book, like emails going missing, files going missing, or getting corrupted, computer malfunctions, recording corruption, calls being dropped, yowling heard over the static, mechanical malfunctions in their homes. There were increased shadow figure sightings and odd daily interruptions that go far beyond just bad luck. Now, that part interests me because I know the struggle of working in demonology. You basically have to pray over everything you do because demons don't want information out about them in the world. So they'll try to disrupt and try to frustrate you into giving up. Don't believe me? Ask anybody in demonology or who has even done podcast episodes concerning it. Things will go wrong like clockwork because they're trying to disrupt that process of getting information out into the world. Now, Darren Evans' story begins in 1982 when he found a very odd Ouija board, and it was like one of those carved wooden ones underneath his girlfriend's house. A plumber had found it while working, and it was double-sided, and it was clearly being used on both sides. On one side, there was a dark background with symbols carved into it. What looked like candle drippings were also carved. Those carvings had been filled with black candle wax. Someone had engraved the name Zozo on the board, and bat wings surrounded his name. Darren went underneath the house to see where this board had been unearthed, and he found a very strange sight. On each corner where it had been found, there were jars with the lids clamped shut, and blackbirds were inside that were preserved and yet seemingly bloody as well. The book wasn't super clear about the state of what was inside the jars, but they were clearly blackbirds. And later, Darren found out that Zozo actually means blackbird or crow in ancient Basque. And not only that, these birds are associated with all kinds of misfortune. If I had to guess what was going on, it might have been an attempt to bind Zozo or to keep the board from getting out into the world. But honestly, we don't know, right? Apparently, the house in question that this had been found under was already haunted, and they all called the ghost Leonard. But if this blackbird jar weirdness were a curse, this family's life would have fallen apart. And so that's why I'm thinking it's a way to contain Zozo and bind him or the board itself in some way. Now, Darren found himself extremely drawn to the board. Immediately, the makeshift planchette that they made began to move on its own. He asked whose board it was, and it spelled Leonard. Then there was a creepy knock at the door with nobody there. And then the second time, it was his friend Randy who joined in on the fun. And later, unfortunately, he lost his life while driving. And though we can't immediately blame that on Zozo, Zozo did correctly predict his death. And I think they're asking really weird questions. I don't want to know how I'm going to die, but apparently other people do because they were asking him this. And for a while, it sort of played along with Randy's ideas of who he thought he was communicating with. He thought he was talking to his idol, Bon Scott of AC/DC, and it had responded with a common Australian statement, asked for a joint, and seemingly took a hit of the joint, then said, "See you in hell," which, was taken as a joke at the time. Why wouldn't you think that this was kind of funny and a spirit was kind of fucking with you? If I was a spirit and I was wandering around, I think I might mess with people through Ouija boards just a little bit. Over time, it kind of took some turns, and they started to be like, okay, maybe there's something wrong here. And the board claimed that Randy was cursed, that it wasn't Bon Scott at all, which was a long shot anyway, let's be honest, that it was Zozo, and that he'd die in a car wreck alone at night. And weirdly, car was misspelled with a K. Are you a stupid lower level entity? I don't know. I don't know why the car was misspelled. I'm pretty sure they know how to spell car, but hard to say. Randy later had called Darren crying, saying he couldn't go on. And when he did get his friend on the phone, Randy told him that he'd see him in hell. And the next morning, Randy's girlfriend called him crying because Randy had recently been treated for depression, but Randy was dead. He was drunk and had crashed into a telephone pole the evening before. Darren may have been the last person ever to talk to him. And it's hard to say if Zozo was responsible exactly, but it is suspect. Remember that demons aggravate existing mental health conditions. Demons are not responsible for mental illness developing, though their presence nearby causes extreme harm in general to people. And I don't think they give you depression, but they may take genetic predisposition for it and turn it into a living nightmare, right? Then they started including earth, wind, fire, and air elements into the sessions, and this appeared to intensify them. One session had repeatedly spelling window and then hello, and then there was an old man who had recently escaped from a nearby mental institution for people who were developmentally challenged. He was standing there in the window looking in at them, and then he took off, and he later told the cops that the devil made him do it, right? So very creepy. I mean, Zozo clearly has eyes into our plane, into our realm, even if he is not causing all of these things. Darren's friend Michael thought that they should burn the board, and as they were getting ready to do this, they heard church bells in the middle of the night. Weird. And then the fire was extremely tall and spread to the gas can exploding and gave Michael severe burns because he also caught on fire. So clearly, this entity did not want the board to be destroyed. So that's really scary. And the board itself was completely unscathed. And my thought is that if this is a demon, fire probably wouldn't fix it, right? They're all about the fire, right? And then years later, because that episode was not enough apparently, Michael wanted to play with it again and asked it how he would die, and it told him murder. This was the last time that Darren ever saw Michael alive. He was found dead in his driveway, poisoned, and it went unsolved. Like, why are you asking these things, is my thought. And then Darren at one point asked Zozo how he would die, and it said he'd be stabbed to death, but this took years to manifest, and no, he didn't die. I'm not sure why. It's really one of those things where maybe it knew he could die and told him that. Maybe he caused it. It's hard to say sometimes. But the last time Darren ever used this board was in the late 1980s. He really wanted Zozo to show itself and asked it to possess his mother-in-law's dog, which I'm like, why? That's not a good idea because poor puppers. I really just don't like it when animals are involved at all. Animals, children, the elderly, anybody who's vulnerable. It just seems evil to me, but that's me. They were trying to make the dog come to him and then run away. And this guy's obsession with this board and this entity he knows nothing about seems like a trap that was laid for him, maybe. This actually does happen in demonic narratives. I'm not saying that Zozo's a demon. I actually don't think Zozo is a demon. But I'm trying to lay out the phenomena so you can see my thought patterns. But in demonic narratives, it's like a trap is set for any particular person or family, what have you, where they seem to get this once-in-a-lifetime perfect deal, and then things go wrong. Like the second they get there, like maybe they find a house that's beautiful and old, but it is exactly what they're looking for. And then once they get there, horrible things start happening. You know, they get pulled into a trap, into a story. And later when they're looking back, they're like, oh, this was a trap. It seems like Darren's obsession with Zozo was a trap that was laid specifically kind of for him. And what ended up happening that night is that the room grew quiet and heavy. This is described a lot with Zozo, where people will have these experiences, but they never say, except in maybe once or twice, people have said evil. But we have to remember that when people say evil, a lot of the time they mean negative. Because a lot of people haven't come across that kind of evil or maliciousness or malevolent intent. So they mistake extremely negative for evil. And considering that it does not come up in Zozo narratives, that's the first thing that makes me go, okay, maybe this isn't a demon. Because if you've been listening to me long enough, you know that every single demonic narrative has that feeling of evil and extreme malice to the point that you want to run and you don't want to stop running until you are far away from this thing. It scares the fuck out of you on like an evolutionary cellular level. Okay, like this is not, oh, the air feels heavy and dense and negative. This is pure evil. So be aware of that when you look at demonic narratives. Automatically, I'm kind of skeptical, but I was interested in the phenomena. It had been described in Richard Estep's In Search of Demons, which go check it out if you have not read it yet. It is a really good primer on the subject of demonology from a lot of different perspectives. But yeah, it had talked about this and like an entity that keeps coming through talking boards and almost sort of spreads like a virus. That's so strange, right? So I wanted to know for myself what it was. And that's how this episode came into being. Now, the dog whimpered, coughed, and barfed, snapped at people, and seemed to be going insane, which was very odd for this dog. It was a very sweet puppy. Sadie, which was the dog's name, had run into the woods, apparently sounded evil, kind of from afar. And later, this poor baby was found with her throat torn out. Like, my God. You would think, though, that this series of events would convince somebody that Zozo's not a good thing, but sometimes we do get drawn into a vortex of dark things before we fully know what's happening. The disconnected points in our mind only becomes like a systematic plan through hindsight. And Darren was very clearly losing control of himself, which makes sense because Zozo is a possessing entity. And remember, there is more than just one possessing entity. Demons do not have the corner on the market. There are several different types of entities that are capable of possession. This spirit began to isolate him, or rather sort of push himself to isolate himself. And then he felt just really far away from his wife, his family, even himself, and his whole support system. He didn't really tell anyone that he'd found a really odd abandoned campsite, nor that he had stashed the board there. The board was addictive and it made him feel powerful and on the cusp of something important. And, once again, he was losing control and he decided it'd be a good idea to stay in this abandoned camp for a couple days and work the board. It is odd that the board kept sort of calling to him that much, but cursed objects are kind of weird. And I do think that some people are susceptible to this sort of thing. This isn't really a comment on Darren. I think some people become interested in the knowledge that they feel they can gain from the entity, but you have to remember entities like this, they might have fascinating knowledge, but they're also liars. Not every spirit, of course, is a liar, but when you get into malevolent types of spirits, yes, they're liars like almost by default. They will tell you almost always what you want to hear. And you can't always listen to what spirits are telling you. Like, you're just going to tell me whatever I want to hear, so I trust you, and then let you in, and then you try to possess me, asshole. Sometimes we do get pulled towards these dark things and towards dark knowledge. And just be aware, especially if you're talking to an entity, they may not be telling you the truth. But is it 100% of the time? Of course not. Every single spirit is different. But Zozo, just the patterning of the way it latches on to people in their lives is malevolent by default. If you have Zozo come through the board, I would close that session immediately because Zozo is never a good experience for anybody who's come across him. Now, oddly, the board itself was devoured by a bunch of rats while it was in this campsite. The board was gone, but Zozo wasn't. And it told Darren all sorts of other things on other boards, that he was the chosen one and had been chosen by Zozo, that Zozo was his guardian angel, promised him powers, told him it was a king of kings and a ruler of realms. To be clear, demons have kings too, but so did Jinn. Darren's personality had a marked change, and his life began to exhibit a series of unfortunate events and extreme bad luck, which is not uncommon in these types of cases. Anxiety attacks with physical symptoms. He started to believe he was cursed, and then he suffered a really serious nervous breakdown in 1993. He had started to see hallucinations of horrible images. He became deeply paranoid, crying on his mother's doorstep, and she had said that she saw a demon in him. Now, I would argue that it was oppressing him at this point and terrifying him to break him down, and his mom did her own version of a deliverance sort of exorcism while he fell into a small 24-hour coma, and said that she had seen shadows circling him during the night. He felt much better the next day, and he promised to stop using that board. But unfortunately, the call of Zozo drew him back into that dark vortex. With another relationship, Darren proved Zozo was real and then came home to the board telling his girlfriend and kids jokes and further testing the board's ability to divine information without seeing it. And then, of course, being a Zozo experience, it got all super dark and creepy all of a sudden, telling them it wanted to kill Darren, and that the reason why was because he was with God, and that Zozo could be found in the mirrors, maybe even watching them. Darren starts up again on the spirit boards for some reason. At this point, I'm kind of wondering, what will it take to scare him enough to stop using them completely. It told them that his daughter would have an iron tongue, whatever that means. And Darren ended up ripping up the board because, now it's threatening his kids. And a few hours later, she nearly died by drowning, but then had a high fever and a tick was found on her neck. Kristen, his daughter, thankfully was okay after a frightening ordeal, and she has no memory of the incident. But something about the way that this was manifesting, I'm pretty convinced this is some kind of jinn with a relationship perhaps to Lilith, because there is an entity when people are having Zozo experiences. They also end up having experiences with this entity called Mama, right? Who seems to control the Zozo entity. Now, Lilith, as we know from history, according to one biblical document, she was originally Adam's wife, but she didn't want to really bow to him and be lesser than him. So she ended up shacking up, it seems like, with multiple demons and becoming essentially the mother of demons. Lilith as a symbol has kind of been reclaimed by witches as a symbol of not bowing to a man. So it's really hard to say who Lilith is exactly. She was explicitly, according to Judaism, an evil character. Nowadays, it seems like there's a lot more sympathy for her. And truthfully, I don't know, hard to say. It is even possible that spirits like Lilith go through an evolution eventually, and maybe kinder eyes are looking at her situation than the patriarchal society of ancient times. So I really don't know. I don't know if Lilith is a good or a bad thing. Maybe even the Lilith of today and the Lilith of then are two separate entities. You just never know. The phenomena starts to get pretty malevolent. But something that was posited in the book and something I had thought of is that maybe these Z spirits, which are not just Zozo spirits, because Zozo's not the only thing that comes through. There's all sorts of different ones. Other names that the Z entities go by are Zaza, Zo, Zam, Zepot, or Zeppo. I don't know. Could be French. Z8, Zono, etc. These could be alter egos of Zozo, or maybe they're him pretending to be other entities than who he is. They also might be different. At times, Zozo even indicates as being female. And we do have to remember that jinn are shapeshifters, but they usually present in one gender. They definitely have a preference. And demons don't have a gender. They just mock humans in whatever voice they feel like. So this could also just be a ploy to gain the trust of, by presenting as whatever gender they think might feel safer to the victim. Maybe they are Lilith's children, and that's why so many come through and in seemingly different genders, personalities. And it was thought that Lilith had stolen Adam's seed, and through sex with an archangel, who probably isn't one anymore, she had sired the Lilam, or earthbound demons. And because of that ancient classification error I'm always talking about, where everything that was not of God and his angels was at some point labeled a demon, this possibly happened with Lilith as well. Many jinn are thought to be demons, and for all we know, maybe she had birthed something similar to a jinn, or maybe the jinn themselves, though the story tells us that they were made by God out of smokeless fire. So I don't know. I wasn't there. The thing that I keep coming back to is it's not nearly to the level of a demon. An evil presence, once again, isn't really mentioned except for once or twice. And the intensity is there, yes, and there is malice, but the phenomena nor the progression of the experience is there. This thing does not behave like a demon. And as for the predictions, it was putting through, yes, demons do have knowledge of past, present, and future, but supposedly jinn are often thought to have that unnatural knowing as well. And the story goes that they used to eavesdrop on angels at the lower rungs of heaven to try and bring back to divination. That's the story that people tell in Islam. It's hard to say. I don't know where jinn are getting their information. That's the legend. And prayer sort of helps with these situations, but there just isn't a violent reaction to Christian iconography. Normally it's trying to turn it over in these experiences or cover it or something like that, but it's not the kind of reaction we see with demons. Demons seem to be tortured by the presence of crucifixes, images of Jesus, any of that stuff, and get physically angry when they're around. The reaction is just not strong enough. And remember, jinn are... Actually, I probably should have started with this. Jinn are from Islamic folklore and mentioned in the Quran. They are made from smokeless fire. There was angels made of light, human beings made of clay, and jinn made of smokeless fire, right? It's very, very similar to the story of Satan. There was a lot of cross-cultural diffusion going on, but basically Iblis, who's kind of like Islamic Satan, didn't want to bow to Adam because he was like, I'm greater than Adam. Why should I bow to him? And he was cast out with a bunch of other jinn. And it's really difficult whether jinn are demons and demons jinn. The point, though, is that jinn also have kings. Jinn live for an extremely long time past humans. They have their own communities. Jinn can be good, bad, or neutral towards humans. So you gotta remember that this is something that is a widespread, essentially, fact in the Middle East. Jinn are a part of life, and I entirely believe that jinn could have easily maybe like latched onto somebody and come over to the States, or perhaps maybe jinn and fairies are exactly the same thing. I can't say that 100% positively. I'll be looking into fairies a little bit more deeply eventually, but they do seem kind of similar in some of their phenomena. Maybe some people brought fairies with them from Celtic countries. You know, it's hard to say what's going on. I think all of these things are real, right? But I try to look at the phenomena in more of like a scientific way, just because I can't prove any of this is real. I can't sit here and prove to you that demons are real just because I have all of this classification data. If you don't believe, you don't believe, you know? A lot of people actually do believe in demons, though, and weirdly don't believe in ghosts, so that's a little weird to me. But yeah, I've never gotten the question like, oh, you don't really believe in demons, do you? Like, I've actually never gotten that question. I think it's because of like the religious nature of it. But I also understand when people have never come across something like this, why would you believe in a demon? Know what I mean? Like, I get it. Anyway, I got way off on a tangent. There are also these like very quick possessions, and unless it's a demon of extreme power, demons have to kind of go through that progression of encroachment, infestation, oppression, and possession, and that it's a slower process. It takes time to manifest. But jinn are known to be able to bypass some of the things that demons kind of have to go through in order to possess somebody, because they can find an open place in your body. That's what at least is thought to be how they get into people. From what I understand about jinn, they can get in through sickness, like physical, spiritual, and mental sickness, and find a way to latch on your body, or rather inside of it, and just sort of live there for years. Hard to say how that works exactly, but jinn are not confined to the same rules, and they almost always target the most vulnerable person. It just takes a lot longer for a demon to even possess somebody, to even oppress somebody, because they are fighting this thing off. For some reason, jinn don't seem to play by the same rules, and I'm not sure why that is. My guess is that jinn, being a lot more like us, similar to us, like jinn seem to exist between demons and humans in terms of evolution. They have some traits of demons, but they also have traits of us. And maybe they just need an opening through poor health of some kind to be able to come into a person, which sucks because it's like, how do you protect against that? Some of the phenomena is close to being demonic, but not fully. Like, a crucifix might get thrown if it's in the way of the board, but it doesn't cause pain or get twisted or broken, nothing like that. There is the intensified feeling of the presence that's described as heavy, but not evil. But one thing that is interesting is whatever Zozo and the Z entities are, they use the same steps as demons: encroachment, infestation, oppression, and possession. And they're also not nearly as blasphemous towards God and Jesus, and demons never shut the fuck up about either of those things. Like, they're like, God's kingdom is so unfair. I can't believe this happened. I hate God. Blah, 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 blah. Like, yeah, it gets really just like wah, wah, wah with them. And I also feel like demons don't waste a lot of time with telling people that they love them or sexual threats, which does happen in Zozo interactions, probably to get you to almost to commit to the board more and give yourself seemingly to Zozo. There's also even sexual interactions with Zozo. Now, demons can have sexual interactions with humans, but they're always rape. Like always. No, you're not sleeping with an actual demon, people online. You are likely sleeping with something that told you it was a demon, or it meant demon is in the word daemon, Diamon, meeting a spirit of great power. And yeah, if you're getting any pleasure out of this experience, buddy, that's not a demon. Demons in every single thing they've ever done have been malicious in their behavior towards humans. There is never a loving act. I can guarantee it. I looked into this phenomena extensively. You will never enjoy it if it's an actual demon. But jinn, I personally have this theory that succubi and incubi are actually jinn and jinni, and that they have simply just been sort of misnamed over the years, because there seems to be like an initiation. You have to sort of accept a gift from them, and then they come in and sort of sexually torment you. Jinn also fall in love with humans. But anyway, that's a whole different thing, but sorry. Tangents. I get the feeling people like my tangents, otherwise I don't think they'd listen to me talk. Another thing I can't help but wonder is it possible for demons to employ jinn for maybe like a particularly protected person to become possessed, since they can bypass some of those measures, I guess, in place that keep demons from overrunning us? I don't know. Like, there is also the connection with mirrors and phenomena of all kinds. We have shadow people appearing, which we know from my work on skinwalkers is an easy form for a lot of different kinds of spirits to take, since it shows up in almost all narratives when it comes to different negative entities. Not always negative. We do have to kind of throw that in there, that shadow people are not always negative. But I mean, I would say a majority of those experiences are. There's also nightmares, sickness, illusions, the sexual nature of the attachment. And Zozo seems to have an obsession with teenage girls. Now, I did have some kind of experience that started when I was about 15. I first noticed at night when I was trying to fall asleep, something would be touching my arms and my legs. And then over time, when I had moved to Illinois, which has some weird energy, I'm not going to lie, it started to try to move my arms, my legs. It just got much stronger. And then over time, I realized it needed some kind of permission from me to possess my arms and legs. And it was of a sexual nature. And I was like, nope, we're not doing this. Like, because it's like, I don't know you, man. Get away from me, you know? Whatever this was, over time I learned kind of to ignore it. And then eventually I had a practitioner friend of mine get rid of it for me. Haven't had those issues since. Could it be Zozo? I don't know. But also, I was never interested in spirit boards, so I have really no idea. There's also the fact that Zozo can go dormant for even years at a time. Demons tend not to leave people alone for that long. There will be moments of calm, but Zozo goes on for years. That is very odd. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Zozo's not a malevolent entity. Of course he is. But I would argue it isn't a demon simply because the phenomena, though strong when it has that portal and a way to communicate, is simply not intense enough nor focused around religious items enough to convince me. And Zozo was usually right about predicting incidents in Darren's life, but not fully, since Darren's not dead. But his wife, Kathleen, did become possessed and acted very crazy, using the spirit board behind Darren's back and issuing threats to other people but when it came to Zozo's threats, people usually died in the way that Zozo was saying. It's hard to say if he was predicting or threatening, but either way, that is pretty weird. Now, other phenomena that has been reported that I found interesting during these experiences is a weird booming, buzzing noises, feeling like Zozo is there with them and threatening to never leave them. An atmospheric change when Zozo shows up or leaves that's very noticeable, lights going off, a picture of Jesus turned upside down and hanging from a single nail. It's not destroyed, it's just sort of been changed. Moving back and forth like a Z, scratching on the walls, at times targeting small children. Very cold when it manifests. The board has become at times hot to the touch. Manifestation of objects, like in one story, a mirror that hadn't been there before showed up and then soon disappeared. And I'm like, what? Zozo travels with his own mirror? That sounds so fucking weird. But there have also been humanoid figures that showed themselves that were horribly burned with a twisted body. People will feel followed and have nightmares about Zozo. There will be power drains on electronics. Horrible effects on the body when people are attacked, like organ cramps or just feeling extremely sick and incapacitated. There have also been times where people were unable to cry out to Jesus or God, that it stopped them from physically getting the words out. Multiple instances of electronic issues. The sound itself of zzz, like a buzzing noise, they seem to make this sound when they manifest, and it is also very common in several different types of negative entity phenomena. Just this odd connection, or even the sound of actual insects showing up in other types of negative infestations. So that is very interesting. There was also an odd incident with like ravens, where a bunch of them showed up and then one of the specific birds vanished. And apparently that's quite common in Zozo experiences. I'm like, what is up with the birds? Are ravens inherently evil? No, of course not. But like flies or any other sort of manifestation, sometimes entities will use animal forms or insect forms or the illusions of these things to achieve whatever their purpose is. So it's not that ravens are evil. It's just like maybe this one raven was. I'm sorry. I'm having trouble with that one because I'm like, it's a bird. But manifestations do show up of different animals. So it's like I probably shouldn't be laughing. But this is how I deal with this stuff because it is horrible and frightening when it is happening to you. Back though to the crows in Darren and Rosemary's book, there is the thought that fairies would actually shapeshift into crows in their lore. In the Bible, ravens are thought to be unclean birds along with owls. And that sounds to me like something that might have been more commonly believed at the time, because I don't personally believe any of these things are inherently evil. There was also a lot of strange phenomena when it came to the Ghost Adventures episode that featured Darren and Kathleen. And what I find the most interesting is that people reported phenomena coming through the screen. There was stuff with mirrors, screens, boards. Zozo simply seems to need a portal to be able to get through. And that's kind of terrifying, that idea that he could actually kind of reach through the TV as long as you're watching. So strange. And it's like, how do you quantify that? Like, how do we know it's Zozo? You know, Kathleen, unfortunately, was also tormented sexually by Zozo. There was illness, strange pet behavior, among other things that were happening to other people when Zozo reached through the screen. Another thing is that Zozo's mentioned in a book on French demonology from the 19th century. Zozo kept repeatedly going on and on about how it was a king of kings and mentioned paradise. Then he's talking about hell. And usually people that were the most vulnerable were targeted, especially young people. Zozo also has the nature of a trickster, which feels very jinn-like, very obsessed with death and dying, and can invade people's dreams easily. Zozo cases also seem to spike before, during, and after the holidays, attracted to people with depression, people who are lonely and vulnerable and emotional unstable, like teens. Could be why he keeps hanging out with teenage girls. Zozo's attracted to girls between 12 and women in their 30s. So anywhere between 12 and 30, which kind of fits my experience. So one person's experience was very similar to mine. Zozo was touching them and messing with their legs at night. And it was much more malevolent than my experience because it would like pull on their feet. They would get scratched and pinched. And eventually this stopped on its own, but they were waking up the same time each night. Their name is spoken in their ear by a male voice. Another had alien hand syndrome, where her hands performed actions on her without her permission. Mine did need permission, but I've also had repeated dreams of invasion of a spirit that usually remained invisible even in the dream. Zozo is not a demon. in my opinion. People feel Zozo's malevolence and heaviness, but very few times are people describing the feeling of pure evil. It's like when people listen to Annalise Michelle on her recordings, a lot of people are like, this is insanely evil, this has to be a demon. But when I was listening, the whole reason I got involved in that case and did an episode, you'll have to go back in my episodes to go find it. It was an earlier one. I was not convinced that it was a demon. So that's why I got involved, because I wondered, could this possibly be a case where it's mental illness compounded by religious trauma? I did find that she was definitely being tormented by something. I just don't truly believe it was a demon, because once again, the phenomena just wasn't there to convince me that that's exactly what it was. Demons are kind of like a gigantic beacon. They can't hide what they are. Their power is immense. So when they manifest, they have patterns, right? When it's something that is similar to a demon, but definitely not at their level and definitely not having the kind of reactions to Christian iconography, it makes me go, oh, this is likely a jinn or a jinn-like creature. So, those are some of the things. But also, I am a demon folklorist. I have listened to a lot of different recordings, and I do think I'm a little desensitized. So it's kind of hard for me to tell. I can't listen to something and go, demon or not demon. I don't know. But I don't think I'm afraid of a lot of the weird sounds, maybe, because I've listened to too many of them for research. If you don't deal with this shit on a regular basis, I think it can be easy to think that what you're listening to is a demon. But anyway, there are infestation and oppression symptoms in other people's cases with Zozo. There is shadow people phenomena with people reporting these shadow figures that are red-eyed. Zozo seems to be the strongest when the board is open, but it can still reach into people's lives after the board has been closed. And this is usually in more subtle ways: bad luck, accidents, mental oppression. There's even been teleportation of a dog. Just weird shit. Zozo boasts that its power of manifesting to so many people comes from its name, and that the more people speak the name, the easier it is for Zozo to manifest through the board in the room. So when it's spelled out and people say it, I'm guessing with the board open, but it's not that saying these names alone makes him manifest. You need the help of an open portal of some kind. So the board, a mirror, a pendulum, automatic writing, what have you. The name even might be an activation, like a spell, instead of its true name. Names do have power, but saying an entity's name does not automatically call it to you. In demonology, we know that to be true, because if that were true, my life would be infested by now. I'm fairly well protected, but it isn't the name itself. It takes complex ritual to summon a demon, unless they have some reason to be hunting you specifically, because then they'll just come through any door that's available to them. And I don't think everybody has demons hunting them, you know what I mean? So it could also, this thought occurred to me as well, it could be multiple spirits who are pretending to be Zozo or using the activation of the name to build fear. It's hard to say exactly what Zozo is. I'm leaning towards jinn territory. But this case and all of these different cases that people have reached out to Darren, I even know somebody who happens to have a friend of a friend Zozo story, but I trust this person. It's not like friend of a friend in urban legends when you've never met the other friend. A friend of mine who had a friend that claimed to talk to Zozo, and it shows how widespread it is. It's like 6 degrees of separation. How even if you have never talked to Zozo, maybe someone you know has. So it is very widespread, and it does seem to latch on to people, kind of like a virus that travels. But overall, this is very clearly a malevolent entity. It is dangerous, because Zozo is not a good thing. Zozo will not treat you well. Even if any of this sounds familiar and it hasn't told you its name is Zozo or something with a Z, just be aware that this does happen, and Zozo kind of likes to sucker punch people. You have to be careful, because there are malevolent entities at the end of the board. It's kind of like with people. You go through the world and you might have passed a couple serial killers on your daily commute to work. You never know. People are not always good. Jinn are not always good. Spirits in general are just not always good. And there's risk just opening the board. There's risk being in the world. Be careful, because even if it's not Zozo itself, there are predatory spirits and there are predatory entities. And yes, they can hurt you. There's risk working in the paranormal. There is risk doing anything with the paranormal because it is an unseen world and it may, by definition, be unknowable. But we're doing the best we can to try and gather as much information as we can from kind of like this side of the living, because we only experience the paranormal with our senses. So hopefully in the future, I'll be doing more classification work and I tend to gravitate towards the negative entities. I don't know what's wrong with me, but yeah, so that's what I'll be probably looking into. But there are other types of entities. My whole point is that there are different things out there. It's irresponsible at best and hugely problematic at worst to be calling things demons all the time. Not everything is a demon, and I know a lot of people think that Zozo's a demon, and I don't, for super specific reasons. Although this entity is malevolent and it is strong and it can hurt you, it, to me, is not a demon. It doesn't behave like a demon. And I spent a long time cataloging them, but could I be wrong? Yes, I could be wrong. Come up with your own conclusions. What do you think Zozo is? But just my advice, though, is always be thinking critically, especially since I won't be doing content for a little while. Think critically, figure out what is it that makes you think it's a demon, and then, I don't know, use my book or something. My book will be republished probably sometime early next year. I'm finishing up the edits now, and I'll be at Darkness Con Denver, so if you want to come say hi, please do. And then I'll be at Haunted America in Illinois in June. So that'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, all I encourage during my absence, which could be a few months, it could be, I don't know, a half a year while I'm trying to put content together for you guys, be using your discernment. I hope you all have enjoyed my show and listening to me ramble about demons, because, oh my God, my mind is like a tree with too many branches or just a rabbit warren of rabbit holes. I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. I hope you've enjoyed all my episodes. And yeah, go back and listen to them if you're so inclined. I will see you later and see you on the other side of a different podcast or show or something. And I'll announce that on my social media when that starts to be underway. If you want to follow me, you can. I'm under Demon Folklorist on most platforms. If you have questions, please contact me. Feel free to reach out. Or you can email me at demonfolklorist@gmail.com. I'll see you guys later.